There we go, that's the right one. You ready? Yeah. Well, thank you for getting here early. You're the sort of good guys, I guess, who went to bed early and got up nice and early, and yeah, so that's good. Right, this paper is a little different for me because this one isn't actually focused in industry. This is based on a literature review, but I think it's a subject we've touched on and off various times, is sustainability and what that means. And certainly my university and in the UK, it's all about sustainability, and I can see that largely that's about new products and technology. So it's about delivering sustainability through green products that reduce energy and this sort of thing. So the question was, what are we doing, the IGLC? What are the lean construction community doing, thinking, working in sustainability? What does that look like? So this was just a review of the papers, really. Hey. Oh, that red block's not supposed to be there. Never mind. So it became quite obvious as we sort of went through this work that there were really two sorts of conversations going on. There is an active sustainable development or sustainability community, and there's a lot of work being done by lots of people around the world in sustainability. And as a community, we, the IGLC, we're having lots of conversations ourselves around how to make construction better and how to deliver it better, and we have lots of nice tools and approaches that we've developed over the 25 years. Interestingly enough, of course, the first person to introduce sustainable concepts to IGLC was Larry Koskela. But the notion of sustainability is a little bit, sorry, I'm standing a bit close, a little bit older. Started with the Brundtland report in 1987, and that brought us the triple bottom line view. Are you all familiar with that? Yeah. Okay. So these conversations were very inward-looking, or seem to be very inward-looking within the own communities. There's not much crossover in that. On occasions, there's been some attempts to sort of pass information over to the other community, but that's generally been related to try this tool, or try this tool, going the other way around. So the wall hasn't been knocked down, they've just thrown things over in the hope that something will stick, which of course it hasn't really, so nothing much has stuck at all. Yeah, wrong way. So I think one of the reasons that this paper was sort of pulled into the plenary session was because it's sort of really introducing a systematic or structured literature review. So we tackled this review in some depth and with some rigour. And there's advantages to doing this because you are not looking for something specific. You're actually interrogating the whole body of the information, and you're using tools to help you do that. So you're not going in with any sort of preconceived ideas other than an investigation of the whole of the literature. Well, when you've got over 1,400 papers, that's a pretty big review. So you have to have some system and some approach to do that. Why would you want to do that? Well, I mean, anybody who knows me knows that I'm sort of really a big believer in the IGLC papers. It is the biggest, and I believe the only, repository devoted solely to lean construction. You know, nothing else exists like this in the world. And now Fred's done such a good job of making it searchable and you can get access to everything. This is a really rich source of information to find out what we as a community have been doing and what we know and what we can do going forward and what we should be basing our work on. So I know that these are conference papers, and in the academic world sometimes conference papers are not considered to be that high quality. But previous studies have shown that the IGLC does refer to some of its own work, but it also brings in lots of ideas from outside. If you look at any reference list on any of these papers, it's not just referring to, we're not just referring to ourselves. We are bringing in theory from law, from ancient Greece, from economics, IT, and this is all coming in from the outside and feeding into our knowledge base, which makes it enormously rich. It's a really valuable source of information. So how did we make use of it? I'll tell you when I turn over the page. Yeah. Yeah, it does work. I pointed it that way. Actually, there's some slides missing. Can I go back? Sorry, I went over 2 slides. I thought I jumped a bit. Yeah. Yeah. So the problem, which I didn't frame until I started talking about the structured literature review, the problem is how do we get those 2 communities of lean construction and sustainable construction, how do we get them working together? How do we get them to turn to each other and start to develop a common philosophy? So that we've got things like BRIAM and LEED and RAP. RAP is a UK organisation it's not construction focused, but it's about recycling and reusing products. So there's a lot of work done on the circular economy and the technology involved in reusing and recycling. So it's a really useful source of information for that. Okay. So, sorry, I didn't say that. So we're trying to see how we can develop this common philosophy that's not just based on tools. There we go. Right, the structured literature review. The first thing you need to do when using this approach to interrogate your information is to decide what keywords you're going to use. Okay, so keywords are really important. Well, they're key, obviously. And sometimes when you're searching literature, you find either there's so much literature it's difficult to make sense of, or there's nothing at all. So it's a matter of just keep experimenting with keywords that give you a reasonable size of return that you can then start to do your investigation. So we started with these keywords. So out of over 1,400 papers, 43 had the term sustainability in them. So that shows you really we've done very little. Very little. Okay, and that's over 25 years, so that's not a lot really. Okay, so that's okay, 43 papers. What else can we find out from these keyword searches? Well, if you put, or sustainability, sustainable, if you put in sustainable and development, it drops right down to 6. So that's really a very small amount of papers. And this, so why is that? What's going on? Surely this body is really capable and suitable to embrace sustainable development, I would have thought. Okay, green, you can see green, environmental and energy shows that the focus really is on just those environmental aspects of sustainability. Are you allowed to ask a question? Or are you stretching? Yes. Very good. Yeah. So as I say, this shows that sort of we have an issue really, don't we? Because excluded from here, even though we searched on words like social sustainability and economic sustainability, the other 2 of the triple bottom line, it didn't turn up any results, which is surprising, really. Or it's not surprising because I guess the sustainable movement itself is very focused just on the environment. I think they're also missing the triple bottom line. So what else? Oh my gosh, what else did we learn? Yeah. All right, the approach that we took was called inductive deductive. All right, this is a really useful way of approaching a piece of work like this. It's very theoretical. So you start out in an inductive way, so you're exploring through, using keywords, just seeing what's coming up, just identifying some broad themes or broad ideas. And then you can switch, when you've identified some general principles, you can switch into a deductive mode, which is where you set aside any exploration and you just simply follow the road almost mathematically down through the data to discover some specific instances. And then you're going around the circle. And this is a very typical piece of theoretical research that would be done. All right, and we did use NVivo. Everybody familiar with NVivo? Yeah. Okay, and we sort of think that if you are, have more than 10 pieces of literature, or indeed 10 interviews or 10 pieces of research data, NVivo really helps you to get inside that data and has some significant advantages that outweigh the disadvantages of the effort it takes to set it up, because it is quite intensive to start using it, and you've got to be quite rigorous, and it takes a lot of time to do transcribing and going through entering data, identifying codes and all of this sort of thing that you need to do. Okay, but there were 6 out of this piece of inductive deductive work using our logic. There were 6 themes that came up. Okay, the first one was limitation. We looked for limitations in the approaches to lean construction, so we were looking to see what had been said within our identified papers, what was being said about that. Limitations on the approaches to sustainable construction, so we looked at that. What opportunities there are for future work, so that's the one that's really of interest, I guess. And those 3 I'm going to talk about. We also identified 3 other themes that I'm not going to talk about because the paper wasn't big enough to go through, not enough room. So those were the main synergies between lean construction and sustainable construction, the main trade-offs or inconsistencies between the 2, and the potential enablers, the things that are available that will help us bring those 2 streams together. Okay, so as we went through the data, there were sort of 3 general observations that we made in the first place. We'll just check this is the right one. Yeah. Okay, so we can see this is the distribution of the instances of when sustainability or sustainability came up in papers. So you can see it's quite concentrated at the sort of latter years, just recently, with the exception of Huvelo and Koskela in 1996. 6? Yeah, 6. 8. 8, yeah, can't see. So although the Brundtland report was 1987, so it predates, this whole sustainability agenda predates the IGLC, surprisingly, we're really quite slow to get to grips with it. Last year there was a drop-off, so there's a little concentration of 5 years there where we were quite interested in the subject, but it sort of dropped off. I'm not sure how many papers we have this year, but it might have gone up a little bit, but it's not as many, I think, as previous years. And the other thing we looked at was, well, okay, that's the sort of distribution. Who's doing this work? And principally, it's the US and Brazil. And which is probably not a surprise, because, Brazil certainly is quite a leader in environmental issues, certainly, and the US has got a very strong lead certification process, so that would be why that would be of interest, and it's not a surprise. But the other countries really is just 1 or maybe 2 papers. So I think we need to step up and do more. Yeah, is the conclusion from that. Okay, because we're talking about a piece of academic work, it's also important to understand what sort of papers these were, what were the research methods that they were based on, because that makes a difference in how you could use the information in the papers. So we could see there that the majority of these papers were case studies and literature reviews. So there were 17 papers on case studies. And that represents 41% of the papers were based on case studies. So that's just simply reporting what had been done on a project. And if we look a little bit deeper, when you identify the papers and actually read the section where they describe their methodologies, you can classify the papers as being conceptual, theoretical, practical or implementation, or empirical. So you can see that the practical and implication ones is 46%, but really there's very little empirical data. This is where you sort of implement something and measure quantitatively the benefit, effect, or detriment of what's been happening. So again, I think in terms of research and evidence of research, to be able to draw conclusions, the data is very thin here. So again, that means that there's a need for us, I guess, to step up a bit more and get some more data on this. Okay, to go back to the three themes that we were looking at, that we identified, 3 of 6 themes. The first one we looked at was what were the limitations to the approaches of lean construction in general. These have been identified as being, as a method, as a philosophy, lean construction is only partially accepting the idea of the wider view of customer. We still tend to focus very much on the paying customer, excuse me, as being the customer. Although there are papers, and I know Glenn's written some, and there are some within the body that actually call for a much wider view of what customer means. Really important in terms of sustainability, because then you can say society is a customer, the environment is a customer, as well as the economic situation being a customer. So the sustainability agenda brings that much wider view of what a customer is and how you deal with them. So there's a need to look at that. And I guess associated with that is quite limited definitions and overviews of what is value. And I know that this has cropped up in several of the papers that I've seen, is this idea of being more value-driven, which is pushing us away from the simply economic agenda. It's looking at the wider picture. So, and I think there's still some need to broaden that out to embrace sustainability better. And I know, because I live in a practical world, you know, the answer to that is, well, if I'm paying money for a building, why should I pay more? The perception is pay more to include these other things. You know, why should I be interested in social value or these sorts of things? So, and I think that is not being answered, because there's lots of arguments why, not for me to make here, that's a different paper, but I think these are the arguments that can be brought forward. And I think we're probably the right body to do that, because we are supposed to be customer focused, we are supposed to be value driven. So we need to look more at that. So that's society. Yeah, and the little triangle there, waste reusing. We also need a better conceptualization of waste. I think there is still, and I know people are working on this, but we are still confined to talking about Toyota's 7 wastes, which we can have a discussion as to whether they're waste or whether they're places to look for waste or whatever that is, but it's still a recurring theme through the body of what we're presenting. So that's really quite narrow. We need to sort of think as that as well. We have classified that as a limitation of the approach that we are presenting as a body. This is what we is presenting collectively to the world, as this is the conceptualization. And certainly still very focused, I guess, as a body of knowledge, still very focused on the construction phase, and there's a need to start to look at the wider life cycle. But again, that brings in, if you're looking at the wider life cycle, then you have to look at the impact on society, and you have to look at the impact, oh my goodness, on the wider environment. Okay, so limitations that were identified in terms of the sustainability agenda. This was they seem to be really focused on tools, which is something you could say about lean construction as well. But so there's a lot of work done on BREEAM and on LEED, and they also have this problem about the belief of fixed inputs and outputs. So they overlook things like health of workers, safety, wider social value, so that they're really thinking that what you put in, focused on what you get out in terms of economics. All of these have long lists in the paper of specific examples, so you can go and have a look at that if you want to. Okay, the gaps and opportunities that were identified through the literature is that we don't have many metrics. Okay, so it is important to measure, maybe not measure quantitatively, but to measure qualitatively, or to at least identify what you should be looking at as benefits and out of these approaches. We certainly need wider definitions, so that's something that's very strongly come through from the literature. Almost all the papers call for a need to rethink this or rethink that. As it showed, only 7% so far of the papers are looking with empirical studies, so that's a really big opportunity to go and measure some more quantitatively some of the implementations and the benefits accrued from those implementations. Frameworks, this has come through. It's very easy to call for somebody to go and measure, for somebody to define or continue empirical studies, but we do actually also need frameworks within which to do that. So a framework is really important because it enables other people to go and do the same thing, and then you start to build basis of comparable data, which is also really useful. So that's a big benefit of a framework. It's, I guess, the lean approach of moving towards some sort of standardization in the way we would deal with this. New techniques, there are a number of papers that call for new techniques on quite a wide range of issues. So there's new techniques for several things, but it's saying that the techniques that we have in place on both sides, both sides are not doing a good enough job in terms of embracing sustainability and the triple bottom line issues. And of course, I guess one of the reasons that this is being held back is that we don't have specific roles to look at this. So if embracing sustainability is something that is put on top of an existing role, then that's why people don't pick it up, because they're already overloaded. So new roles and new ways and new responsibilities within the prevailing frameworks for both sustainable development and lean construction are needed to pull these two things together. So that should be specifically something that someone is looking at, or a section is looking at. These are not my conclusions, by the way. These are conclusions that have come from the papers. Okay, so just to sum up, before I get kicked off the stage. Quite simply, despite the idea of sustainable development conforming to the TFV theory, it should be the requirements that the lean construction systems are delivering, because sustainability is a requirement. We are not really seeing any integration any integration of lean and sustainability of those two concepts. They're not working together. The US and Brazil are leading efforts so far, but that doesn't mean other people and other countries can't join. And in fact, I think there's lots of opportunities. India, for example, there's probably lots of opportunities to get involved in sustainability as you are developing lean construction. Okay, you've got an opportunity to bring those two things together as you are early in the process. Are you saying 5 years, is it? You've 5 years, I think, been trying to, or been starting to look at lean. So you're really quite early, so you can make differences and changes to the way you're doing things. Only 7% of studies are looking at some sort of empirical research, implementing and then trying to quantify benefits. And whether you agree with the statement or not, I hear many times, oh, well, if I can't measure it, I don't know. I can't implement it, I need to know. 3 main flaws in lean construction, 2 main flaws in sustainable construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So with the question after all the speakers.